Yeah, I don't know if we want to just kind of like reflect on that and kind of see what people thought as far as, you know, obviously there are parallels to what's happening now, but yeah, a little history of the film. What I like about that film is that, you know, what I like about all films that kind of show mass demonstrations is that it shows like the messiness of what decentralization looks like, you know. So it shows, you know, everyone has their own opinion of what should be done at mass demonstrations. When you get 50,000 people together in one spot, tactics become a difficult thing to discuss between each other. And since 1999, since this demonstration, there have been just huge leaps and bounds. What am I trying to say here? There have been a lot of new tactics that have arisen that have really given activists new tools to help each other work together, to sort of squash the beefs that you saw there between the violent and non-violent type stuff. One example I can think of, in 2008, during the Republican National Convention, I was a part of the organizing up there with a group called the RNC Welcoming Committee, and one of the things we developed up there was called the St. Paul Principles, and what that did was essentially a coalition of about 55 different groups, and they were huge labor groups, you know, United for Peace and Justice, including other, you know, anarchist groups and more radical contingents. And what they did was they came up with 12 different principles to sort of, not govern, but sort of, they all agreed on these principles that they would act upon. Some of them included
more of a guide than govern, you know.
More of a guide. It was more about respecting each other's differences, and we didn't see a lot of the conflicts internally like you did in this film. The principles, some of them I can think at the top of my head were, you know, respecting everyone's opinions when it came to diversity of tactics. So if you didn't agree with someone, you know, you thought someone was being too aggressive, you dealt with that internally. You wouldn't go to the media, you wouldn't talk about things on social media, because what that does is it gives leverage to, you know, the authorities, and it creates a divide between the movement when you're usually coming from the same point of departure, and things can be resolved internally. So that was one thing that was dealt with. Another agreement was that people wouldn't overlap. If there were massive differences between tactics, the anarchists, they wouldn't be doing the things that they wanted to do at sort of the bigger labor marches, the peace marches. They gave people space. The theory is, you know, if you're going to take space, make space. You know, make space for other people, respect their, you know, right to however they want to demonstrate. And you know, back then that was sort of a new thing for people, and so you saw a lot of those. But that dialogue is good. You know, it's good to have differing opinions. Another thing I liked about this film is that it shows that, and this is my opinion, but does anyone think that, like, regardless of what the anarchists from Eugene did there, does anyone think that the police escalation or violence would have been any different? You know, I mean, we saw what they were doing to people that were literally just sitting in the street doing nothing. They're coming up and slowly poking people with the sticks, putting off their goggles, you know, spraying the tear gas in the face. And that's something very difficult for people to come to terms with, understandably. You don't want to think that you live in a society where that happens. Unfortunately, we do. And I think that we need to keep having these conversations with each other as a community to come together and come to terms with, you know, what really exists underneath the surface of the safety that we're all privileged enough to live in, you know, most of us. And as far as, you know, relation to the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, I think we're seeing that all over the country where people are standing up, whether it's allies or people that are actually living in these poor conditions. People are realizing that this brutality, this militarization, it's a systemic problem that's actually part and parcel of the inner workings of how they're supposed to function as an entity, as law enforcement. So the argument of, you know, there are good cops, there are bad cops, that is true. There are good human beings, however, they operate under a systematic body that has to do certain things to remain intact. So whether you're a good person or not, that doesn't always matter. Probably a good reason why many of us here are not part of the police department for, you know, those reasons. Not because we don't want to serve our communities, because we know what that would entail. I guess some historical facts about the film. The marching band, I know that you kept seeing throughout, they're called the Infernal Marching Brigade. And they're actually a group of Seattle drummers who were also radicals and involved in politics, and they travel all over the world to a lot of the big summit protests, and they would perform, and they had the gas mask on and stuff like that. As you saw in there too, the police chief resigned 4 days after the demonstration. You can look it up online. It's pretty interesting, his sort of resignation speech. He definitely expresses humiliation for being sort of in charge of the way the police department acted. That's kind of interesting. Any other like thoughts on the film and like as to what we saw? Because obviously there were huge parallels. I mean, you saw broken windows, you saw a lot of
graffiti,
a lot of that stuff, and I think that's something else too. I think that we have amnesia here in this country, where whether or not you agree with people doing that, that's historically that happens in every sort of uprising, whether it's temporary or otherwise.
Take away the tear gas, and reminded me of No NATO a couple of years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Thinking of like at NATO, like marching alongside with the Black Bloc, with a group of Catholic workers, which we clearly have like a difference in tactics and stuff, but there seemed to be an understanding, or even like there was like a separation of space. Certain times, like you knew once it got dark out that if you were going to be on the streets, you were going to be on the streets of the Black Bloc movement, and the nurses march or the vets march or whatever. It didn't seem like such an issue until after the marches were over. You know what I mean?
But the end result was the same.
But it was exactly the same.
Yeah.
It was
police beating people overhand.
Yeah.
It was.
People coming bloody.
Yeah, it was the exact same. I mean, they had 30,000 police
and having talked to the street medic who got her, who got whacked while she was actually tending someone. Now, what would be the reason for that? But yeah, it happened.
Yeah. And bringing it back to this, I mean, it's just like that's what 12 years later, 13 years later, it doesn't seem like there's tactical changes on both sides, but it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of change. It seems like these changes progress pretty slowly. What I did like about the film is how they highlighted the indigenous people, and it showed how far ahead they were. Like it took 2008 for people to come up with the understanding, like we're going to respect each other's space and tactics. They're light years ahead of us. They're more advanced. Like they already understood that on the
because they've been dealing with it so much longer.
Yeah, I think a lot of the difference in opinion too comes from the fact that people just don't communicate with each other, and even the anarchists and even the folks who were doing a lot of the more radical organizing there, they live in Eugene, Oregon. It's probably fair to say they probably weren't making it to a lot of these meetings that a lot of these bigger groups were having and things like that. Something we did in 2008 is, and I was only a small part of this. I live in Des Moines. I was up there for a few months organizing. But folks up there in that community started organizing for a solid year beforehand, and they were going to city council meetings, they were going door to door, they were visibly present. And these are anarchists who probably agree with many of the things that a lot of the radicals here were doing, but they respect other people's opinions, and they understand that there is a whole vast milieu that tactics need to take place for things to actually change. And so when, of course, once the 2008 RNC was over, I think there's 8 of them that were charged with conspiracy to riot, even though none of them even participated in the demonstrations. They just helped. They were the sort of organizing body that gave people housing and things like that. They were charged with conspiracy, and you had all the city council members, you had people in the neighborhoods speaking up for them, on their behalf, because they knew them as people. They talked to them, they understood them. And I think that's what I would like to see more of, is our communities coming together and just talking about things, whether or not we agree or disagree on specific tactics, but actually talking about the major issues and giving each other that space to make our voices heard, and realize that the oppression that we're going to experience, if we choose to go in the streets, whether it's in a black mask or not, we're likely going to experience the same repression, or at least similar. Yeah. And we have to find ways to deal with that together, and we can't be separated by that. And some of us went down to Ferguson. Some of us went down to Ferguson during some of the first heated months when that was happening. And what I saw change from when I was there then and when I went back a few weeks ago was when it first happened, there was no organizing bodies that had really, this is like August 12th, the weekend of, so the weekend right after Mike Brown was shot. There was 500 people in the street, and there was no organization. The groups down there, Black Lives Matter, hadn't started. Yet there were no that I saw. There were no conflicts internally. People were, surprisingly able to get along under the same banner of, we're here for the same reason. And there were no fights. There were no internal struggles. Yes, there were differing opinions of tactics, but they were accepted, and people were given space, and people were respectful of each other. It wasn't until later that now you can still, even down there, you see a lot of division. You see a lot of people trying to self-police and call people out in public and things like that, and not keep it internal, where I think that's negative. I think that's something we should not do as a group. What are you going to say?
I had a thought, and this was just related to something you were talking about. So, like, one of the conversations that I've been in and gone back and forth, as far as, like, the Black Bloc, for example, covering their face in the black masks and that, I guess one of the conversations I've had with other people, which somebody else brought up, was how easily it is without any, like, if you're not organizing prior to a march or whatever, for just especially like a small march, for a few people to co-opt a peaceful march and turn it into something else, and then when their faces are covered, there's no accountability for it. And so then the people who have spent all this time planning are the people who end up, on TV next to the smashed windows or on whatever, you know what I mean? Which that's one of the things that I have a little bit of issue with. Like, I don't have a problem with breaking windows, but if I'm going to break a window, I'm going to stand there and say I broke a window because I'm pissed off, and take me to jail. I don't want somebody else to break a window and then I'm standing there.
Right. I think that's a distinction between, like I was talking about, this era and now, where I think there is accountability issues that people need to take as far as giving people space and making sure that it's an appropriate time to do something. As far as the covering the face, I think,
which a lot of it's for, like, some of it does make sense, because a lot of it is for, like, like tear gas and things like that. But there's other times, and then a lot of people say it's just because I want to remain anonymous, and I understand
there's a lot of people in which it's not safe for them to even be present there. Maybe it's their skin color, maybe it's the fact that they have a job that they can't afford to lose, maybe they're somewhere. So there are people who have real reasons to be anonymous. It's actually unsafe for them to be physically recognized there. And so I think we need to recognize our privilege there as like, because I've seen a lot of that with people.
I remember during Occupy, a lot of people had to wear masks and things.
Yeah, because of their jobs.
And there were a lot of people that had similar sentiments that were against that and that did not recognize it. And I think that was a big rift with the Occupy movement.
There's a group of anarchists in Montreal, and they're doing this student protest, and they're going to release a pamphlet that explained why people wear masks. It's really good. They talk a lot about those same things. It's like when you have a group of 200 people all wearing masks, or a larger group, that shows unity, and it shows that, like, these people aren't just people; they're part of a collective. So those things also, like, help to gather the people together. They also are intimidating police, because when you have a group of people that can't be identified, police are back on the defensive rather than going offensive. And so there's a list of reasons that people wear masks to protest, whether or not they're going to be smashing windows or not. And there's a lot of good reasons to do that, which we're starting to see, I think, more in Ferguson. Some people wearing masks and some not. It just depends.
Which I don't have a problem with people wearing masks. I was just thinking, like, in particular, like, I'm thinking, like, a protest here in Des Moines where there might be 40 people, and then their property destruction happens by just a couple of people that know. Some people, we all know who they are. A couple people might know who they are, but it's not for me to say who that is, though.
And I think going back to the mask issue, I think that, what was my point? Like Josh said, there's a million reasons why people could wear a mask. I think, though, something else we have to recognize, and I put this on my Facebook today, but today there was someone in town that was visited by the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force, under the auspices that someone had called in a tip, about one of their Facebook posts that they thought were threatening. Now, whether someone really called in, I can't imagine someone in Des Moines calling the FBI saying, "Hey, someone made a Facebook post that I thought was scary, or whatever."
They just monitor everything.
And I'm someone who's experienced repression from the FBI and Joint Terrorism Task Force, not as an individual, but as a business owner. I used to own a video store, and I have them come in all the time, just based on affiliation. So the harassment and the intimidation by the authorities really shouldn't be underestimated. And I think that's kind of where, that's a really good discussion to have now, because with the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement, we're talking about privilege, obviously. I think it's very privileged to assume that people, and not everyone, I understand wanting to take accountability and credit, and that I actually respect.
And I'm just saying, like, in the form of, like, where it premises, like, if you spend time with other organizers planning a peaceful march, and then there's that,
Absolutely.
Because I've marched with the Black Bloc numerous times, and I have a lot of friends that are anarchists, and I've been to Palestine, and everybody covers their face there, and it makes a lot of sense, but there are certain circumstances where it's difficult.
And one guy comes up and throws it, it's like, that's not part of it. At that point, you actually are endangering other people.
Right.
So yeah, I understand that completely. But yeah, so as far as being anonymous, I mean, it really is, in my opinion, it's to everyone's best interest to be anonymous, because at this point, in today's political climate, if you take credit for something, there's no guarantee. In fact, it's unlikely that you're going to be, judged based on that act. They're going to try to do as much as they can to put you away for as long as they can. And that's there's so many activists right now. There's a Green is the New Red is a website my friend runs, and it's about the Green Scare, which is sort of the prosecution of environmental activists, which has been happening for the past 15 years. By the FBI, and that's putting people away on conspiracy charges, things they haven't done. I have a friend who's in prison for 23 years for a thought crime, essentially, something that he had talked about doing. And this is important, it's talking about the FBI visiting people. We have to be very careful with what we say. We may say something that we think is funny. We may say something that is like that we aren't sure where we should say it. We should assume at all times that there's someone listening or that someone's reading our emails. I know it sounds like Big Brother kind of conspiracy, but it is true. Because
Edward Snowden made us aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, and so like this friend I had, he was sort of a younger person, definitely said things he shouldn't have said, but if you would ask anyone who knew him, he was not capable, nor was he serious about doing any sort of like violent acts, like blowing up things, anything like that. There was an FBI informant who was 18 years old. She went under the banner Anna, and she first came to light at a convergence that I helped organize here in 2004, and she infiltrated herself into this particular event that we hosted here, and then for the next 2 years, she was paid $75,000 by the FBI to travel around with this group of like 3 people who all met here to basically see if they were a threat. Now, what she ended up doing was, she absolutely entrapped them, and she encouraged them to do violent acts. They ended up, 2 years later, they were in a cabin in California that the FBI paid for. The FBI paid for, they wiretapped the whole place, videotapped it, and she was encouraging violent acts. And, this person, and it should also be said that she was actually having romantic relationships with this person who is now in prison for 23 years, encouraging them to do violent acts, encouraging them to go farther and farther. Younger kids not knowing what security culture is, not knowing, doing stupid stuff, no doubt. But should they be in prison for the rest of their lives? Those things happen. And so as far as I would love to live in a world where we could just take accountability for the act that we did. But that's just not the world we live in.
But some people can. I do live with people that are, people that are spending the rest of their life in jail for doing things like taking a jackhammer to a missile silo, and now you're going to spend a lot of time, years and years and years in prison. Frank Cordero, he's done 6 months bit 8 different times, just for.
There's no guarantee.
But I'm saying, but so there is room for doing that, though. It's not to say that you just can't do it in this area, because you can. And you do get prosecuted to the fullest extent. You have to know what the risk is, because, like, for trespassing, for example, I did 30 days in jail in Polk County here just for a simple misdemeanor. You can you will get a big.
It's also to the extent.
And it is a
privilege,
privilege
right?
for me to be able to go to jail because a lot of people can't do that.
But it's also an extent of the sentencing is to the extent of your privilege. I mean, someone like me who might get arrested with marijuana possession, I'm likely to get a deferred judgment. Someone of color who gets arrested for the first offense, they're going to jail.
Right, absolutely.
Almost. And so that, I mean, that's where it's like the lines blur when it comes to the accountability and.
Right.
When it comes to mass protest, though, the line's pretty indistinguishable. I mean, there is privilege, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But like you saw the clip of ex-President Clinton talking about the protests, and he basically threw the people blocking traffic in with people breaking windows and made it indistinguishable. Like you're either with us or you're against us, right? Like he made it so clear, like. It doesn't matter. You can't sit in the street. You're not peaceful if you're sitting in the street, which we would think is bullshit. But that's, again, those people are going to get thrown in whether or not people are committing.
And they're trying to do that
And
now,
the way
too,
he twisted their words too is even saying, when I condemn people coming and breaking windows of small businesses, but he didn't mention like I condemn people coming in and breaking the windows of Nike, which is
or a Starbucks or a bank of whatever
with sticks or
exactly
their hair pulled and.
So and we're seeing that now too. The officers that were unfortunately killed in New York City that had nothing to do with these demonstrations are now being linked to.
And now there's another one that was like a Cleveland or Columbus, Ohio, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, so we have to understand that they're going to try to make those connections as much as they can.
And it already has.
They don't want to take
Pundits have already been making that connection.
Yeah, but that's where I think we have to, as communities, and I think Des Moines is an interesting. I think we have an interesting opportunity because the size of this town is, it's small enough to make national news if we do something relatively, on a scale that's relatively large at all, just because of the size of the town. You don't really hear a lot from Des Moines. But it's big enough to get some real activism going on here, to get some real organizing, and to really, and it's, I think in some ways we don't suffer a lot of the same things that other cities do. We do to the extent that racism exists everywhere, police brutality exists everywhere, racial profiling exists here, just certainly. But it's not something that we deal with or that we have to deal with. Part of it's the makeup of our we're predominantly a sort of Caucasian area, but at the same time we have the highest incarceration of people of color in the entire country. I mean, and that's something that most people probably don't know. And so I think that we have a unique opportunity here to really bring what I think I've seen has been a really diverse but unfortunately divided group of activists in the last 10 years that I've been trying to organize here. Bring them together and really try to do something. I mean, there's a demonstration tomorrow. I don't know if anyone else knows about this. At the mall.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter at the mall.
Yeah, I mean, how many other groups? There's the AFSC. There's 100 different groups in town that are peace groups that have been active. I don't understand. Like, we should be working together. Everyone should be working together in these things. There's a lot of climate justice groups working here.
Yep.
To me, it's all connected, and we should be having collective meetings that make these connections and help each other out, building a coalition of activists who can actually, be a force to be reckoned with in this town. So that's what I wanted to start this series for, and hopefully we can move to a bigger spot where we have more people and there's more demand. But
and of course, social media and the advent of live streaming is going to be a bigger part.
Yeah,
if it is already. Just in the few years that people have been on the street streaming.
I don't have time. I've heard some rumblings around people wanting to organize stuff for the caucus when it comes back around again. So.
Yeah.
Just as a film, I'm kind of curious as to what you thought.
It was interesting. I guess it seemed like a lot of stuff that was like an amped up version of what I've seen elsewhere. It wasn't anything that was super shocking, but more awful stuff going on.
Yeah. The only thing that was missing was the National Guard. Yeah, they didn't get that back.
This film kind of started. A guy named Tim Lewis who directed this. This was sort of at the beginning of the indie media movement. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of indie media. It's kind of died out now, kind of been replaced by Twitter and social networks and stuff. But indie media was, you could go to indiemedia.org for 15 years, and you could get every major city had an indie media. You could do, you knew what was going on in your city. This sort of once technology kind of became democratized enough for people to be able to afford it, kind of in the mid-90s, with whether it's bands were able to put out their own CDs, people were able to make their own films. This was one of the first films that was really, this pretty much set off indie media, was this film. And I think a friend of mine has this quote, and I think this is interesting, is that his quote is that radical movements are the motor of history. And what he means by that is that every radical era has a goal, and they try to push forward, that goal. So, in the 90s, it was what you saw here: people trying to push for, what they're still pushing for: free space, to be autonomous, to be as liberated as possible. And in doing so, you actually have these type of demonstrations actually brought us Twitter today. In 2004, during the Republican National Convention in New York City, a lot of the people that worked on this film were part of another group that developed this code that was called Text Mob. And what that was, Text Mob was a way for activists on the ground to be able to communicate with one another, to say, here's the next convergence spot, or, and it was through cell phone technology. Here's the next convergence spot, or there's police activity over here, we need help, or this is happening here. That same code, it had mixed results. 2 years later, a couple of people that now work at Twitter used this code to basically start Twitter. They said, let's take this model and let's horizontal organizing, which is what this is all about. What these movements are trying to put out as a new way of modeling our lives. A horizontal restructuring of the way we do things. Bottom up as opposed to top down. And so it's no surprise that we see Twitter being used in a lot of uprisings, like the Arab Spring in Tunisia and
Egypt.
It's more surprising that we see Twitter used for what it's for the banal sort of everyday conversational stuff that it's made so much money off of. But so I think we just keep in mind that our communications, the way we interact with each other, is extremely important. And I'd like to just get some more discussion into Moines. Just groups like these talking and using consensus models, kind of like what Occupy did. I know everyone here wasn't part of that, but the consensus model works really well. And I know people have different affiliations with different political groups, but I think it'd be worth it to keep doing films like these, having these discussions, and hopefully building a larger audience that we can, support each other in all the activities that we're doing. But does anyone have any other events that are going on that are worth noting aside from tomorrow's action, which I actually don't even know what time that starts?
6 o'clock at the AME Church. That's on in between East 15th and East 16th on University. The AME, yeah. Yeah, it's on the event page. The address got changed from the courthouse to that church as the gathering spot. We rally there, and then from there, people will proceed to the mall.
Any other thoughts? I'm going to bolt pretty soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate you coming. In a couple of weeks, we'll try to get another film going, and if anyone if anyone ever wants to do a meeting here or other film, the space is always open to do stuff like that. Currently, we're usually open most evenings, and Sundays are always open. So just hit me up if you guys ever want to show your own film or do something like that here.
Did your menu always change?
It changes every Monday, yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm just curious.
For now, we're
I
hoping.
just saw the one written there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for listening.